Section 58 of The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Elizabeth Buchanan. The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 1, by Shao Xuexi. Translated by Henry Bencraft Joly. Chapter 24, Part 3. Chia Yun wended his steps straightway home, and the next day he came to the front entrance, where, by a strange coincidence, he met lady Feng on her way to the opposite side to pay her respects. She had just mounted her carriage, but perceiving Chia Yun arrive, she eagerly bade a servant stop him, and with the window between them, she smiled and observed: "Yun are, you're indeed bold in playing your pranks with me! I thought it strange that you should give me presents, but the fact is, you had a favour to ask of me, and your uncle told me even yesterday that you had appealed to him." Chia Yun smiled. "Of my appeal to uncle, you needn't, aunt, make any mention, for I'm at this moment full of regret at having made it. Had I known at an early hour that things would have come to this pass, I would from the very first have made my request to you, aunt, and by this time everything would have been settled long ago. But who would have anticipated that uncle was, after all, a man of no worth?" "Strange enough," lady Feng remarked sneeringly. "When you found that you didn't succeed in that quarter, you came again yesterday in search of me." "Aunt, you do my filial heart an injustice!" Chia Yun protested. "I never had such a thought! Had I entertained any such idea, wouldn't I, aunt, have made my appeal to you yesterday? But as you are now aware of everything, I'll really put uncle on one side and prefer my request to you, for circumstances compel me to entreat you, aunt, to be so good as to show me some little consideration." Lady Feng laughed sardonically. "You people will choose the long road to follow, and put me also in a dilemma. Had you told me just one word at an early hour, what couldn't have been brought about? An affair of state indeed to be delayed up to this moment! In the garden, there are to be more trees planted and flowers laid down, and I couldn't think of any person that I could have recommended; and had you spoken before this, wouldn't the whole question have been settled soon enough?" "Well, in that case, aunt," ventured Chia Yun with a smile, "you had better depute me to morrow and have done." "This job," continued lady Feng after a pause, "is not, my impression is, very profitable; and if you were to wait till the first moon of next year, when the fireworks, lanterns and candles will have to be purveyed, I'll depute you as soon as those extensive commissions turn up." "My dear aunt," pleaded Chia Yun, "first appoint me to this one, and if I do really manage this satisfactorily, you can then commission me with that other." "You know in truth how to draw a long thread," lady Feng observed laughing; "but hadn't it been that your uncle had spoken to me on your account, I wouldn't have concerned myself about you. But as I shall cross over here soon after the repast, you had better come at 11 a.m. and fetch the money for you to enter into the garden the day after to morrow, and have the flowers planted." As she said this, she gave orders to drive the "scented carriage," and went on her way by the quickest cut; while Chia Yun, who was irrepressibly delighted, betook himself into the I Hsia study and inquired after Pao yü. But, who would have thought it, Pao yü had, at an early hour, gone to the mansion of the Prince of Qing, so that Chia Yun had to sit in a listless mood till noon; and when he found out that lady Feng had returned, he speedily wrote an acknowledgment, and came to receive the warrant. On his arrival outside the court, he commissioned a servant to announce him, and Ts'ai Ming thereupon walked out, and, merely asking for the receipt, went in, and after filling in the amount, the year and moon, he handed it over to Chia Yun, together with the warrant. Chia Yun received them from him, and as the entry consisted of 200 taels, his heart was full of exultant joy; and turning round, he hurried to the treasury, where after he had taken over the amount in silver, he returned home and laid the case before his mother, and needless to say that both the parent and her son were in high spirits. The next day, at the fifth watch, Chia Yün first came in search of Ni Erh, to whom he repaid the money, and then taking 50 taels along with him, he sped outside the western gate to the house of Fang Ch'un, a gardener, to purchase trees, where we will leave him without saying anything more about him. We will now resume our story with Pao yü. The day on which he encountered Chia Yün, he asked him to come in on the tomorrow and have a chat with him, but this invitation was practically the mere formal talk of a rich and well-to-do young man, and was not likely to be so much as borne in mind, and so it was that it readily slipped from his memory. On the evening of the day, however, on which he returned home from the mansion of Prince Pei Qing, he came, after paying his salutations to dowager lady Chia, madame Wang, and the other inmates, back into the garden; but upon divesting himself of all his fineries, he was just about to have his bath, when, as Hsi Jen had, at the invitation of Xue Baochai, crossed over to tie a few knotted buttons, as Ch'in Wen and Pi Hen had both gone to hurry the servants to bring the water, as Tan Yün had likewise been taken home, on account of her mother's illness, and She Yü, on the other hand, was at present ailing in her quarters, while the several waiting maids, who were in there besides to attend to the dirty work, and answer the calls, had, surmising that he would not requisition their services, one and all gone out in search of their friends, and in quest of their companions, it occurred, contrary to their calculations, that Pao yü remained this whole length of time quite alone in his apartments; and as it so happened that Pao yü wanted tea to drink, he had to call 2 or 3 times before he at last saw 3 old matrons walk in. But at the sight of them, Pao yü hastily waved his hand and exclaimed: "No matter, no matter, I don't want you!" Whereupon the matrons had no help but to withdraw out of the rooms; and as Pao yü perceived that there were no waiting maids at hand, he had to come down, and take a cup, and go to the teapot to pour the tea; when he heard some one from behind him observe: "Master Secundus, beware! You'll scorch your hand! Wait until I come to pour it." And as she spoke, she walked up to him, and took the cup from his grasp, to the intense surprise, in fact, of Pao yü, who inquired: "Where were you that you have suddenly come up to give me a start?" The waiting maid smiled as she handed him the tea. "I was in the back court," she replied, "and just came in from the back door of the inner rooms; and is it likely that you didn't, sir, hear the sound of my footsteps?" Pao yü drank his tea, and as he simultaneously passed the servant girl under a minute inspection, he found that though she wore several articles of clothing the worse for wear, she was, nevertheless, with that head of beautiful hair, as black as the plumage of a raven, done up in curls, her face so oblong, her figure so slim and elegant, indeed supremely beautiful, sweet and spruce; and Pao yü eagerly inquired: "Are you also a girl attached to this room of mine?" "I am," rejoined that waiting maid; "but since you belong to this room, how is it I don't know you?" Pao yü added. When the maid heard these words, she forced a laugh. "There are even many," she explained, "that are strangers to you; and is it only myself? I've never, before this, served tea, or handed water, or brought in anything, nor have I attended to a single duty in your presence, so how could you know me?" "But why don't you attend to any of those duties that would bring you to my notice?" Pao yü questioned. "I too," answered the maid, "find it as difficult to answer such a question. There's however one thing that I must report to you, master Secundus. Yesterday, some Mr. Yün Erh or other came to see you, but as I thought you, sir, had no leisure, I speedily bade Pei Ming tell him to come early to day; but you unexpectedly went over again to the mansion of the Prince of Pei Ching." When she had spoken as far as this, she caught sight of Chiu Wen and Pi Hen enter the court, giggling and laughing, the two of them carrying between them a bucket of water; and while raising their skirts with one hand, they hobbled along as the water spurted and plashed. The waiting maid hastily come out to meet them, so as to relieve them of their burden, but Chiu Wen and Pi Hen were in the act of standing face to face and finding fault with each other, one saying: "You've wetted my clothes!" the other adding: "You've trod on my shoes!" and, upon all of a sudden espying some one walk out to receive the water, and discovering, when they came to see, that it was actually no one else than Hsiao Hung, they were at once so taken aback that, putting down the bucket, they hurried into the room; and when they looked about and saw that there was no other person inside besides Pao yü, they were at once displeased. But as they were meanwhile compelled to get ready the articles necessary for his bath, they waited until Pao yü was about to divest himself of his clothes, when the couple of them speedily pulled the door to behind them, and walked as far as the room on the opposite side, in search of Hsiao Hung, of whom they inquired: "What were you doing in his room a short while back?" "When was I ever in the room?" Hsiao Hung replied. "Simply because I lost sight of my handkerchief, I went back to try and find it, when unexpectedly Mr. Secundus, who wanted tea, called for you sisters; and as there wasn't even one of you there, I walked in and poured a cup for him, and just at that very moment you sisters came back." "You barefaced low bred thing!" cried Ch'iu Wen, turning towards her and spurting in her face. "It was our bounden duty to tell you to go and hurry them for water, but you simply maintained that you were busy and made us go instead, in order to afford you an opportunity of performing these wily tricks! And isn't this raising yourself up, li by li? But don't we, forsooth, even so much as come up to you? And you just take that looking glass and see for yourself whether you be fit to serve tea and to hand water or not. To morrow," continued Pi He, "I'll tell them, whenever there's anything to do connected with his wanting tea, or asking for water, or with fetching things for him, not one of us should budge, and that she alone should be allowed to go and have done." "If this be your suggestion," remarked Ch'iu Wen, "wouldn't it be still better that we should all disperse, and let her reign supreme in this room?" But while the two of them were up to this trouble, one saying one thing and another another, they caught sight of two old nurses walk in, to deliver a message from lady Feng, who explained: "To morrow some one will bring in gardeners to plant trees, and she bids you keep under more rigorous restraint, and not sun your clothes and petticoats anywhere and everywhere, nor air them about heedlessly; that the artificial hill will, all along, be entirely shut in by screening curtains, and that you mustn't be running about at random." "I wonder," interposed Ch'iu Wen with alacrity, "who it is that will bring the workmen to morrow and supervise the works?" "Some one or other called Mr. Yün, living at the back portico," the old woman observed. But Ch'iu Wen and Pi Hen were neither of them acquainted with him, and they went on promiscuously asking further questions on his account; but Hsiao Hung knew distinctly in her mind who it was, and was well aware that it was the person whom she had seen, the previous day, in the outer library. The surname of this Hsiao Hung had, in fact, been originally Lin, while her infant name had been Heng Yu; but as the word Yu improperly corresponded with the names of Pao Yü and Tai Yü, she was in due course simply called Hsiao Hung. She was indeed a hereditary servant of the mansion, and her father had latterly taken over the charge of all matters connected with the farms and farmhouses in every locality. This Heng Yu came, at the age of 16, into the mansion to enter into service, and was attached to Heng Yuan, where in point of fact she found both a quiet and pleasant home; and when, contrary to all expectation, the young ladies as well as Pao yü were subsequently permitted to move their quarters into the garden of Broad Vista, it so happened that this place was, moreover, fixed upon by Pao yü. This Hsiao Hung was, it is true, a girl without any experience, but as she could, to a certain degree, boast of a pretty face, and as, in her own heart, she recklessly fostered the idea of exalting herself to a higher standard, she was ever ready to thrust herself in Pao yü's way, with a view to showing herself off. But attached to Pao yü's personal service were a lot of servants, all of whom were glib and specious, so that how could she ever find an opportunity of thrusting herself forward? But contrary to her anticipations, there turned up, eventually on this day, some faint glimmer of hope; but as she again came in for a spell of spiteful abuse from Ch'iu Wen and her companion, her expectations were soon considerably frustrated, and she was just plunged in a melancholy mood, when suddenly she heard the old nurse begin the conversation about Chia Yün, which unconsciously so affected her heart that she hastily returned, quite disconsolate, into her room, and lay herself down on the bed, giving herself quietly to reflection. But while she was racking and torturing her brain, and at a moment when she was at a loss what decision to grasp, her ear unexpectedly caught, emanating from outside the window, a faint voice say: "Hsiao Hung, I've picked up your pocket handkerchief in here." And as soon as Hsiao Hung heard these words, she walked out with hurried step, and found that it was no one else than Chia Yün in person. And as Hsiao Hung unwillingly felt her powdered face suffuse with blushes: "Where did you pick it up, Mr. Secundus?" she asked. "Come over," Chia Yün smiled, "and I'll tell you." And as he uttered these words, he came up and drew her to him. But Hsiao Hung twisted herself round and ran away, but was however tripped over by the step of the door. Now, reader, do you want to know the sequel? If so, the next chapter will explain. End of section 58.
End of The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 1, by Xueqin. Translated by Henry Bencraft Joly.